get said today, that will be available. I'm going to begin by acknowledging, in the spirit of reconciliation, that we are meeting on the traditional territory of Indigenous people who have lived and traveled through these mountains for thousands and thousands of years. In particular, we acknowledge the Shuswap and Tsuut'ina First Nations, Tunaxa First Nations to the west, as well as the Blackfoot, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Piikani, the Siksika, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, who are perhaps closest to us, including the Wesley, the Bearspaw, and the Chiniki, as well as, of course, the Métis people of Region 3. And we are, in fact, all treaty people. So I apologize to anyone if I mispronounced any of those words, but I do want to give a sincere thank you to everyone who is here. First off today, I'm going to introduce Laurie Edward. Laurie's been our executive director for all of 2 weeks now, so she is a deep expert in absolutely everything that we do. Laurie comes to us from the Banff Center and from Mountain Equipment Co-op, where she has spent a career deep in community issues. She also started off her career as a financial advisor, so she's kind of here full circle today. Laurie, did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you very much, Karen. It's really good to be here with you all today. Yes, as Karen mentioned, I did spend some time early in my career as a financial advisor, so I have that particular personal connection to the valuable work that many of you do on behalf of your clients. And I have been watching with great interest as Canadians become more and more interested in aligning their values and their aspirations with their financial decisions. I'm thrilled that the Banff Center, I don't work at the Banff Center anymore. I used to 2 weeks ago, that the Community Foundation is what I meant to say. That's funny. That the Community Foundation here plays an important role in that in the Bow Valley. And I'm also really fortunate that I have joined an incredibly strong team, and I'm really grateful that so many people who've continued to build this organization, who've been building this organization for the last 20 years, are still involved and engaged and contributing their knowledge and their expertise and helping to continue to build momentum. And and as a part of that, Bill Fisher is here today, our outgoing executive director, and he is going to give us an overview of the foundation. And I'm really grateful that, Bill, that you're here to share your breadth and your depth of knowledge so that we can tap into that today. So I'll pass over to you, Bill.
Thanks, Laurie. Nicole, can you share the screen with the presentation? Wonderful, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us. The purpose of inviting you to today's session is really twofold. First, we want to give you a sense of what we do, and secondly, hopefully raise awareness of how important building a culture of philanthropy is to the long-term health and sustainability of our community. Next slide, please. I'd like to begin by just sharing a really short story with you. My mother graduated from the Holy Cross School of Nursing in 1949. And she worked at that hospital and then several medical clinics in Calgary until she retired. She was a devoted alumni, and she cared deeply about nursing and healthcare throughout her entire life. However, when she passed away, she didn't have anything in her will to leave anything to her alumni, anything to bursaries for nursing students, or even making a donation to a health-related foundation. And all it would have taken was for me to ask her if she would like to leave money to a charity or cause that she cared about. And I missed that opportunity, and it bugs me to this day. So as many of you know, asking people if they have a favorite charity or a cause can make a real difference, whether it's during the preparation of a will, whether it's during estate planning, or simply part of a discussion among family members around the kitchen table. Next slide. So just a few quick words about the Banff Canmore Community Foundation. Our region stretches from Lake Louise all the way down to the Stoney Nakoda Nation and all the hamlets and towns between those two spots. Next slide. Here are our 7 community building goals. And 2 years ago, we completed our first ever vital signs report. And it has helped us really to understand what were the community's biggest issues, and as determined by survey respondents in the Bow Valley. And the top 3 priorities were addressing the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Secondly, just the issues around the environment, in particular, the effectiveness of wildlife corridors and how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And thirdly, obviously an ongoing and long-term issue, how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or how to tackle affordability issues in the Bow Valley. Next slide. Our programs, although we may be best known for our community grants, we actually offer a variety of programs and services. And these programs all reflect what our charitable objects direct us to be doing. And I'd like to draw your attention to one of the ones that sometimes doesn't get as much attention, and that's convening dialogue or convening meetings. We often bring together frontline organizations or content experts to better understand emerging issues in the Bow Valley. And as an example, 2 weeks ago, we brought together the early childhood education organizations in the Bow Valley to discuss their current challenges around funding, how to implement COVID-19 safety precautions, and other related issues. And with that information, we are now in a better position to look at potential areas of collaboration between those organizations and potential emergency grant making to this very important sector of our community. Next slide. One of our other charitable objects is to raise funds that support our grant making. And we have several categories of funds depending on the wishes of our fund holders. Our single biggest fund is with the Banff Center. It's the Banff Center Endowment, and it has a value of about $10 million. And on an annual basis, the foundation makes a distribution to the Banff Center that supports a number of programs, including bursaries for artists. And it's managed actually as a separate endowment with its own investment portfolio. The rest of the funds that you see on that slide are pooled for investment purposes under our community endowment. Next slide. So the community endowment has a value of about $3.1 million right now. It continues to grow, not only from investment earnings, but from new gifts that are received and new endowments that are created. And our funds are professionally managed, and it's based on a balanced portfolio with a long-term horizon in mind. And our aim is to generate a source of investment income that can be used to cover some of our administrative and management costs, but also be able to distribute at least 3.5% of the market value on an annual basis, and ensure also that we protect the fund against inflation and dips in the market. Next slide. And this is a little difficult to see, but this is a financial snapshot of our operating fund. We call it the Now Fund. And we use this particular fund to manage our day-to-day expenses, our grant distributions, our flow-through donations, and also many of the programs that we offer. And our approved audited financial statements can be found on our website. Next slide. So last fiscal year, which ended in for us on March 31, 2020, the foundation distributed over $500,000 in grants, scholarships, and bursaries. And this current fiscal year, since April 2020, our foundation has also teamed up with the Canmore Rotary Club Charitable Foundation and the Women Nancy Powell Foundation to coordinate our emergency grant making in the Bow Valley. And collectively, we have awarded or supported funding of over $350,000 to close to 30 projects in the area. And our COVID-19 emergency response and recovery work continues. In fact, we are currently soliciting grant applications as we speak, and those will be reviewed in early November for yet another review and distribution of emergency funds. Next slide. Our foundation, as Lori's already mentioned, has a strong and committed board of directors. You can see the list up there on the screen. And they not only carry out their fiduciary duties, they also roll up their sleeves and they get involved in all aspects of our work. And we have a number of committees where a lot of that work does get done. They're supported with external advisors or committee advisors, as you see up there, who would help extend the depth and the breadth of our work over the entire Bow Valley. We have 2 paid staff, and then we have Jen Ficus and Corey DeMano, who provide contracted services in finance and communications. Next slide. So what's our value proposition to you as professional advisors? And I just want to highlight the first 2. First, we are a local organization with deep roots in the community. And we really strive to understand the community needs and the issues at a very granular level. That's our principal advantage over other organizations. And we take a broad brush view at that. And secondly, we bring donors to the table as community builders, and we work closely with them to align their philanthropic vision with that of the community's needs. Next slide. So where do we begin? Well, is there a cause you care deeply for or a community need you would like to address? Well, that's a question that I should have asked my mother. But I know it's a question that you as a professional advisor probably have near and dear to your heart when you're working with your clients. And I'd like to think that there's an opportunity for us to work together, and Lori will talk a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation. But at this point, I'd now like to introduce Andrea McManus to you. And Andrea is a co-founder and senior counsel with the Trail Group. It's a Western Canada-based consultancy that specializes in working with charities and nonprofit organizations. She's known for her passionate belief in philanthropy and the value of the nonprofit sector in society. Andrea is a highly strategic thinker and builder who has worked with and trained and educated organizations and fundraisers throughout North America, the Caribbean, Mexico, Europe, and Egypt. Andrea has also made many contributions to build a stronger and more professional sector, both locally, nationally, and internationally. And her list of accomplishments is unbelievable. She was the first chair of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Initial Chapter President's Council. She was the founding chair of the AFP Canada Foundation for Philanthropy, the first person outside the United States to hold the position of chair of the International Board of the AFP. And she was also the founding chair of the Calgary Chamber of Voluntary Organizations. She sat on numerous local and national initiatives to strengthen the Canadian not-for-profit sector, including Imagine Canada, the Ethical Code Advisory Committee, Canada Revenue Agency's Charities Technical Issues Working Group, and Imagine Canada's Personal Philanthropy Project. And for all of you tax experts out there, in 2019, she was appointed to the Advisory Committee on the Charitable Sector, a cross-Canada committee that provides advice to the Minister of National Revenue on issues affecting the nonprofit sector. In 2004, Andrea received the Canadian Business and the Arts Award for Innovative Partnership. And more recently, she received the Queen's Jubilee Medal in 2012 for her contributions to the not-for-profit sector in Canada. Andrea is a graduate from Mount St. Vincent University. She's an AFP master teacher and a contributing author to 5 books on nonprofit management, fundraising, and global philanthropy. And Andrea, with that, I'm going to turn the Zoom platform over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bill. My pleasure. Now just let me get my slides set up here. Okay. That's working, right?
Sure is.
Okay. So thank you for the introduction. And I just want to say, because I realize that probably most people on this call are either lawyers or accountants. And even though I sat on the CRA Technical Issues Working Group for 10 years, I was the only non-lawyer, non-accountant in the group. And there was a lot that went over my head. I had to get it translated for me. So, but it was a very enjoyable time for sure. So I'm really excited about doing this session with you. I've been getting to know a little bit more about what's happening in Banff. We've just started working with the Banff Center, and I'm very involved in that project, which is kind of interesting because 25 years ago, when I went out on my own as a consultant, one of my first clients was the Banff Center. And so I'm kind of wondering if in the year of COVID, I've actually come full circle and if that means anything. So, and I have one other client that was my main client back then too, that I'm actually also working for here in Calgary. So it's, it's a little bit, feels like sort of a blast to the past. So get this right. So I'm going to address 3 things for you today. Oh, if I could just say, if you could hold your questions until the end, because when there's a lot of people on the call, I want to make sure that I manage the time and respect your agenda. If you're like me and you have a question and then you're afraid you might lose it, which I often do, feel free to put it in the chat box, and I'll go back to those at the end of my slides. So I'm going to start by reviewing a little bit about donors and what they tell us they are looking for and what they want and how they think about the sector. And yes, there is research, relevant and current research to that effect. I'm going to talk about trends, what's emerging, what are the COVID realities, how that's affected, or what we know so far, 7 months in, about how that's affected the work that we do. And Bill mentioned philanthropic culture, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit so that just to give you an understanding of what philanthropic culture means and what is really the relationship between philanthropy and fundraising. Lots of people think they're the same thing, and they're not. Lots of fundraisers think they're the same thing, and they're not. So the Association of Fundraising Professionals has conducted 3 cross-Canada research studies now, and so we actually have benchmark data. We're able to compare the 3. It's called What Canadian Donors Want. And the last survey was conducted in late 2017 and was released in 2018. Sorry, the other qualification I should make is that I am talking by and large the way things were pre-COVID. Lots of this is still relevant, and we don't know what post-COVID is going to look like, or how that's going to impact what we all do in our daily lives. So I just wanted to I'm going to try to refrain from peppering my comments with, well, and now we don't know what that looks like, that sort of thing, just to keep it clear. So so by and large, public confidence in the charitable sector has increased compared to the 2015 study. It's gone up over the 3 from 2013 to 2017 pretty steadily, from around 72% to 75% to 78%. And certainly the public has greater confidence in the charitable sector by a good margin than it does in the private sector or in the government sector. And although, a minority of Canadians continue to believe that charities overstate the proportion of donor dollars that go to the cause versus to overhead and administrative causes, there has been an increase in the proportion who trust charities in this area. And this is really important for not just those of us who work directly with nonprofits, but also community foundations and the work that you do as well. I have joked in the past that my tombstone is going to read "Death by Overhead," because this is such a problem that we face. It's such a myth in the community. And I'm going to come back to that towards the end of my remarks, but it's really good to see that we've been making some progress on what is a very complex issue, not an easy, it's not nearly as easy as just saying this is good and that's not good. There are lots of reasons that people give to charities, and by far the most prevalent ones are, they look at whether it can achieve its mission and goals and its impact, but that needs to align, and it's very often more about, I'm going to pay back, I've been touched by this cause, somebody who's dear to me has been touched by this cause. You may or may not be surprised to know that when we do research into why people give, getting a tax receipt is at the bottom of the list. People generally tend not to give because they're getting a tax receipt, although it can be a factor, particularly in planned giving, affecting the amount of the gift. And when we see gifts by securities happening towards the end of the year, there's often a tax component to that. But the charity they choose is almost always one that they want to support. We have, I just need to get rid of this myself. Thank you. Generally over the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, we have seen a decline in the number of Canadians who make a donation. And we get that both from personal tax returns, but the What Canadian Donors Want survey also supports that. But in 2017, there was a bit of an uptick back to the levels of 2011 and 2013. So why is this an issue? This is an issue because if we have fewer people giving, it generally impacts continued giving and giving but for multi-generationals. But what we've also found is that, and this comes from tax returns, is that the average gift that people are making, or the average amount that people make in a year, increases. So total number of donations down, total value of gifts up, which helps to balance it out. Except for my next bullet, which says the annual contribution has fallen in the last couple of years. Again, more in line with 2013. Certainly in Alberta, we've definitely seen that with the economy and less confidence in the regional economy and personal finances generally. Canadians tend to spread their dollars across more causes. But this is one place where I will weigh in on COVID. We have seen almost consistently that every time there is a downtick in the economy, we necessarily do not see people stop giving, but they are giving to fewer charities. So they tighten up their giving, and there may be a decline in it, but it's always to fewer charities. As times get better, they tend to expand that list of who they're giving to. So certainly for fundraisers, this means we really need to, strengthen the relationships we have with the people that we want to keep really close to us. This last point might surprise you, that millennials and Gen Xers are more likely than boomers to say they've named a charity as a beneficiary of an insurance policy. And also more likely to have named a charity as a beneficiary to other physical investment or financial assets. Also, I had a link at the first slide on here. There are 6, I believe 6, the full study and 6 fact sheets are available for you at that link if you wanted to explore this further. So what are we seeing in terms of trends? The first thing is that it is increasingly competitive and concentrated landscaping. So, 30 plus years ago, when I first moved into this work, we were doing pretty traditional fundraising, and it was pretty traditional giving. Now charities are competing with for-profit companies. There's everything from crowdfunding to for-profit brands with a social purpose, to more entities than ever are seeking to tap into Canadians, do-good dollars. And, in the 86,000 Canadian charities who continue to vie for a piece of the giving pie, 75% of revenue is generated by only 5% of organizations. So, and that tends to be, the behemoths, the universities, the healthcare systems, the large charities. So there's a lot of smaller to mid-sized charities that are really struggling to compete. So what this means for them is, for all charities, is that organizational strategy, what you do, how you do it, who you do it, where you work, who you partner with, understanding who cares about you, and how you connect with them has never been more important. The one thing that stays constant throughout is that mission matters most. So sticking very true to your mission, communicating your mission really well, not succumbing to mission drift, which can be a killer for organizations, but being able to really clearly articulate and compellingly articulate to prospective donors how you make a difference and how important your mission is. The second piece of this is marketing communications and really honing your message and getting it out. And partnerships, which I will talk a little bit more later on, is the ability to and willingness to partner with other organizations. The second trend that we see is kind of a rebirth in campaigns, big campaigns. And so just by definition, what I mean by a campaign is rather than ongoing fundraising, what an organization needs to raise annually, a campaign has a start and a stop. So it may be for a capital asset like a building, but it could be for, say, a new program, or as an example, the Children's Hospital Foundation in Calgary has recently wrapped up a campaign to launch a mental health initiative for youth. There is a capital component to it, but there is also a programmatic component. And we have seen campaigns go in and out of favor over the past number of decades. And now in the last 2 years, we've probably seen more campaigns than we have in the last 2 decades. About a year ago, there were probably likely in the area of 450 campaigns in Canada, a total goal of close to $20 billion. They're probably all in various stages of pause or go forward now. But the biggest difference here that for charities is that the traditional way of approaching campaigns is no more. You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to fit your campaign into what will be successful, not the way it has always done. And one thing that's coming out of this is a very obvious or clear need to invest. It costs money to raise money, and campaigns can cost anywhere from 5% to 20% of the goal. That's totally dependent on the factors, the elements of your organization, of a single organization, and what you can build on and what you need to build. The third trend that we've been seeing is all about wealth. And we all know about the concentration of wealth that's happened in the world. We have, the 10 top billionaires in the world have more wealth than 90% of the rest of the world combined. And, we We also see a concentration of power and privilege in the way that wealth is now distributed so starkly at either end of the spectrum. And Canada is not immune to this. The wealth of households with more than 1 million in assets is expected to grow by 78% in the coming decade. And women now control an increasing percentage of wealth in our country. TD Bank did a research study about 6 years ago into women and wealth. And it's a fascinating look at the money that will be flowing to women on the death of a spouse, or women making their own wealth, which really gives us a different picture and the impact that that has on organizations' ability to raise money. The other thing here is that in the new wealth is that a greater percentage of today's wealthy are self-made. And they have different attitudes and perceptions, and they bring that to the table in their giving. The fourth trend, which is not a surprise to anybody, is the accelerating digitization and analytics. Not likely that I need to explain this, but just briefly, 91% of Canadians are internet users. 66% have purchased online, and online giving grew 20% annually between 2006 and 2015. And if you think that boomers and the older generation do not give online, that is wrong. I can't remember the last time I made a gift that I didn't make it online. And I'm not alone. Boomers are some of the most frequent givers by giving online. And we have organizations like Canada Helps, for example, which is an online giving portal, which has actually received $1 million plus gifts through online giving. So it's critically important that organizations are able to compete with this and to actually continue to analyze the data and adapt as you need to around that. The fifth trend is around multi-generational giving, and I think this is probably of particular interest to the Banff Canmore Community Foundation. Different generations are all giving meaningful amounts, but they behave and they engage and they interact differently. And just as a point of interest on the importance and impact of multi-generational giving, and particularly as it relates to families, a colleague of mine in Toronto recently completed her doctorate on family giving. And she's the first person to do so in North America. There's very little research on family giving, and we are seeing a real rise in family foundations. It's the fastest growing bucket of charities, and has been for some time, are family foundations. But multi-generational is not just within families. It's the different ways that people connect and reach out and listen in the way that charities need to reach out to them. So, the fundraising profession is very active in, tailoring, which we can do with digitization, but tailoring to different generational cohorts. And the last trend that we're seeing is really around the impatience for plug and play. And we see this in everything, but it's also true in fundraising and giving. And so institutional impatience, managing expectations for more and faster. And what this means for charities is that it's more important than ever that planning for your fundraising campaigns and programs include all stakeholders, that people understand how fundraising impacts philanthropy and the role that philanthropy and donors play in your organization. Just a note also that when I use the term philanthropy to encompass all donors, I am not talking about donors who make 6, 7, 8-figure gifts. I think wealth is a very personal, it's a very personal thing. I have my wealth, you have your wealth, and just because there's an extra 0 at the end of somebody else's gift doesn't mean my gift isn't about philanthropy. So I counsel and approach the work that I do very much in that regard, that if you are investing in making the world a better place financially through your own resources, you are engaging in the act of philanthropy. So now a little bit about what we've seen in the last 6 months. So it's the last 7 months, but these numbers are stats are for 6 months from March through to the end of August, and they come from KCI Philanthropy, who have a phenomenal research arm. So 176 gifts announced of 500,000 or more in that period, versus 110 during the same period in 2019. It's interesting that that's up, but not surprising when you see where they come from. So the total value of approximately 426 million, and 46% of these gifts were from corporations and 33% were from foundations. In previous years, those numbers were 28% and 19%. Now the foundations, their giving has not quite doubled, but they really stepped up in terms of total value, and foundations gave 58% of the total value, or 246 million versus 87 million in 2019. And if you think about what you know in terms of donors that have stepped in to stabilize organizations, like if we look at the arts, for example, there has been significant money flowing to arts organizations for the 2020 year. I have a client in Calgary that's an arts organization, a fairly small organization. They were just getting ready to really more actively engage in doing some major gift work. They are cash flush until the end of this calendar year. They cannot spend the money that they have on programming because they've received so much COVID-related assistance. And so we're working with them to position their messaging around that, because that's not going to be the same next year and years after that. And they're not alone in that. And it's not to say there's no criticism there. It's not wrong. It gives them stability to survive, which is what many organizations need. But we've really seen foundations step up, and considerably so. Not surprisingly, individual gifts are down considerably over the comparable time periods, from 425 million to 71 million. But I will say that we are starting to see volunteers encourage organizations to continue to carry on with or to restart their campaign plans. And we're starting to see people becoming more comfortable with actually making gifts. So where is the money going? A lot of the money has been much more significantly directed to community service charities than is typical. So food banks, for example, food banks across the country have been supported amazingly during COVID. Organizations that help the most vulnerable. And if anything COVID has done, it's revealed to us in glaring detail who are the most vulnerable and what is most important in our society. It will be, I think, fascinating to see how much of that carries over. I don't have a crystal ball on that, and I don't know what that's going to look like, but we'll continue to track and pay a lot of attention to that. So what is philanthropy? When I was chair of AFP, I traveled extensively for those 2 years, and I would travel to many of our, at the time we had about 260 chapters around the world, and I got to visit many of those, and I was able to have as chair, what was my kind of key message that I wanted to communicate, and mine was that I would talk to fundraisers and to donors about the difference between fundraising and philanthropy, and I was unceasingly surprised at how many people sort of looked at me blankly. Fundraising is simply what we do to engage and nurture philanthropy. And there's lots of kind of, the real definition of philanthropy is giving to the, to the human cause based on human needs. And there's all kinds of more trite definitions of it, but it's very much based on values. People will rarely give to something they don't care about in any meaningful way. They may do so because of the person who asked them and because they made a smaller gift. They will go to events, they will buy things at auctions, they will do that kind of thing. But real philanthropy that a charity can grow and count on as part of its sustainability connects deeply into the values of the donors, and donors wanting to know not just what, but they want to know why. Why is that important? And it's not because something like saying in response to why is it important is not that, well, we help feed people. So why is that important? And not because they don't starve, but because, really digging deeply into the community, the values and beliefs of the community as well, and why that's important. So very much based on and finding those values in your individual donors. I love this quote because it's so apropos. Is that, nonprofit organizations exist to fulfill community needs. They don't give to your organization because your organization has needs. They give because your organization meets needs. And, over my 3 decades in doing this work, the number of times I have had conversations with organizations that I have worked with is that, no, you need to redo this. All this is doing is talking about your organization. People don't want to know about your organization. They want to know that you're well run, that you're well governed. Those are key questions. But they want to know how well, they want to know how well your organization does at stewarding funds. But more importantly, they want to know the impact of investing through your organization, because that's where it touches on the values that people have. And so really looking at why you do what you do and understanding that it's not about your organization, it's about what the community needs. So we've really moved in the last decade and a half or so to understanding a lot more about philanthropic culture as opposed to a fundraising culture. When I do board training around engaging boards in raising money, I can guarantee you that 9 times out of 10, if I say to a board member, I'd really like to, get you engaged in raising some money, that board member 9 times out of 10 thinks, oh, you know what, I can do anything. I can do anything, but I can't ask for money. And so they think of that in terms of, that one moment in time when you actually ask for a gift, instead of being an organizational approach to and spirit that relies on philanthropy but celebrates philanthropy and draws those connections between giving people the opportunity to meet their philanthropic goals with the goals that you have for your mission or your organization. So it really helps people with their shared values connect with your cause. I might work for a an animal shelter, and I might be able to get my friends to, contribute $100 for a particular event. But there are people that would be in my circle that would never give more than that, because it's not really part of their, it may be part of their value system, but it's not part of their value system that they want to invest in philanthropically. A real focus on your values also helps to recruit volunteers and donors to your organization. It encourages the commitment of volunteers and board members and staff, and it should be underscored in all of your key messages and marketing. I bat 50-50 on this. I kind of have a thing about traditional mission statements. This particular mission statement, a traditional approach would be at ABC organization, we provide services and programs for people who have had injuries or birth defects to their homes, or sorry, their hands. That's, pretty uninspiring. I remember when I first saw this about 20 years ago, it moved me tremendously, and it moved me to wanting to know more. So as I said, though, I bat 50-50 on this with organizations, and when I talk about doing something that's different in terms of what's traditional in mission statements. So philanthropy is really focused on the community, and it benefits many people. And we talk about an investment as opposed to a transaction by the giver. And it's very donor focused. We in the fundraising world, we spend a lot of time focusing on what donors are looking for and how we report to them. When I first got into this business, we would talk about donor recognition. We'd give you a thank you letter, we'd put your name in our annual report, and we might put your name on the donor wall. Now we talk about stewardship, and it's stewardship of both the funds that they're investing in your organization, but also stewardship in the relation that you have with that particular giver. Development, on the other hand, so when I talk about fund development, that functions in the larger context of philanthropy. And fundraisers, we really need to be able to identify the dreams of our donors. Some cultivations can be one meeting and one ask. Some can be 18 months and multiple meetings. And I do say to volunteers in particular that if you go in and you make an ask the first time you meet with someone and you get it, that's great, but you've probably left some of the investment on the table. Fund development is a department in an organization. It's a mix of systems and processes that go into making respectful, thoughtful, intentional, and strategic asks to your various donor stakeholder groups. So, people often say, I remember being on a radio, the guest on a radio call-in show one time, and this gentleman phoned in and said, oh, organizations shouldn't pay people like me. They should all be done by volunteers. I was the equivalent to the devil in his eyes. But you can't develop meaningful relationships with donors that really are centered on what they're looking to achieve through their giving without having good systems, policies, processes, and resourcing in place. When it comes to actually fundraising, that is in its narrowest sense, is just the carrying out of a specific activity to raise a specific gift. And if you approach it that way, you may produce some charitable gifts, but you're going to have very few philanthropists who are willing to have a long-term relationship with you that you can include as part of your sustainability plan. When I was talking, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember when I was talking a few minutes ago, but whether I had left this slide in. But this is just, it gets to the point I was making about, this is the donor cycle. So the work that we would do to identifying donors, to involving donors through various cultivation and communication channels. And then you have an ask somewhere along the line, and then you go into thanking and stewardship, and then the cycle just repeats itself. What often happens is people focus in on this, small ask part here, when really all of these pieces that go into making this successful are critically important in terms of presenting a well-governed, a well-run, a strong mission, strong communications, and building trust in your organization and your ability to wisely use the precious donor dollars. So I wanted to talk a little bit, I'm trying to keep my eye on the clock too. I appreciate that for those of you who have been in the Community Foundation world for a while. Emmett Carson was a fellow that I met a number of years ago. I was quite taken with. He had a very unfortunate where he left the Silicon Valley Foundation under very cloudy circumstances, but nevertheless, I left his name in because these are not mine. But he talks about the emerging school of new philanthropists and who they are and why they're important to us. So first of all, they're master learners. They never stop learning. They like to focus on a few issues and invest heavily. They're not wedded to leaders or organizations. So hence, proof is in the pudding about, not talking about your organization to the absence of talking about your mission and the people that you serve. And they're likely to be more libertarian and less focused on government. They are young and they're extremely wealthy. And they like new approaches to doing things. They like crowdfunding. They like impact investing. They like social entrepreneurship, all of the new buzzwords that we've been hearing about for so many years. And they definitely have an inherent suspicion and worry about traditional charities. They think there's too many of them. They're inefficient. They're overburdened. They're slow. They're not innovative. And they believe deeply in collective impact and large-scale social change through their philanthropy. So why is this relevant to us? So these are who some of these people are that we all know about. But, okay, now I've forgotten who's who here. This is Charles Bronfman. One of these guys is Carnegie and one is Rockefeller. I've forgotten now which one is which. But Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook, Jeff Skoll, Mackenzie Bezos, Bill and Warren, of course, Mark Zuckerberg. And not that that many of the organizations that we're dealing with are going to have gifts from any of these sources, maybe here. But at the turn of the last century, in the early 1900s, was the late 1800s, early 1900s, was the advent of the Gilded Age, when we had the first enormous concentration of power in the hands of the robber barons. Sorry, this is Charles Bronfman. And that really heralded a whole new way and approach to charitable giving, and which eventually birthed a whole field around fundraising and active connecting with the foundations that these people set up. In the 1980s, Buffett and Gates changed things up again, and certainly their giving pledge around the world has billions in subscribed wealth from people's estate wealth that they've already committed to charity. And Mackenzie Bezos has just turned the philanthropic world on its ear with her new approach to doing things. My point here is that these trickle down. This trickled down and influenced a whole century of giving and asking. And this is what's happening here. And our organizations need to pay attention to that, because we have all these new things that have come on stream, and that charities are, traditional charities are competing with, back to one of my early slides, that these are the words that are important now. Innovation, impact, ROI, not return on investment, but results, outcomes, and impact, as opposed to a traditional, return on my cash return and financial return on my financial investment. Social enterprise, we talk about investing rather than just donating. I'm a huge proponent of collaborative, collective philanthropic impact. Some of you might be familiar with the Resolve campaign, which was an 8-year initiative in Calgary that involved 9 social service agencies that came together to raise an initial goal of 120 million to build affordable housing with supports. The work that my previous company before Vitreo, we did the work that led to that campaign, and I was the counsel of record on that campaign for 8 years, and just saw the power that these organizations had in coming together, and the learnings that they had from that. And they did not raise 120 million because we had, in successive occurrences, the flood, the collapse in 2015, and the oil prices, and then the economy. But they did end up raising in the vicinity of 80 million, and 8 of those 9 charities had never actually raised money before. So it's the largest initiative of its kind that I know of in North America. And I still field calls from people about what that was involved. And I think that the givers, the emerging new school of philanthropists understand that one organization cannot move the needle in terms of systemic change. Yes, there is that work that they do on the ground, but for real community systemic change, you need to have that broad cross-section coordination, so that, isolated impact, small change, conventional philanthropy, versus collective impact, large scale change, social change philanthropy. And both of these are, of course, need to be reflective of the community that you live in. But I also see community foundations as having a major role in bringing organizations together and nurturing this kind of collaboration. So just quickly, a couple of things on COVID realities. If there's one thing that I hope more than anything else that we see different, is this the end to the discussion and belief that charities, it's inappropriate for charities to have reserves. I don't even need to say anything more. For too long, charities have had to work under this misplaced, misguided belief. But you cannot conserve your mission for the future if you do not take care, if your financial house is not in order. I think we've had a real insight into what's important to us, who's important to us, the frontline workers, seniors. It is so difficult to raise money for seniors' causes. The arts and culture, again, different across the country, but very challenging for arts and culture organizations. But where did we all go when COVID first hit? We went to online arts and culture events to keep us sane and keep us going. The benefit of organizations that operate at a strong community level. I think, again, this is something that community foundations will benefit from, but appreciating what is right in your own backyard and what needs to be supported in your own backyard. And my last one is, I think we're going to see more about this emerge over the next few months, is but how strong has governance been? Just as an example, in the middle of the summer, I was talking back to back. I had occasion to check in with 2 of our clients whose work had gone on hold. One, their board had galvanized itself and was meeting every week to see where they could pitch in and help, just in case they needed. The other one, their board had not met since COVID started. you talk to funders about that, and I'm pretty certain I know what they would say. And just, I always like to end with a little bit on my pet peeve, which is scarcity versus abundance, and the irritating focus on overhead. You know, I'm not at all for unlimited, but wise, prudent investment in success. If that makes sense in the private sector, and why doesn't it make sense in the nonprofit sector? Charities cannot function on shoestring budgets where they're not competitively paying staff, where they're not investing in their staff, where they're not taking care of their financial future, and they're not, you know, thanking and always looking for new donors. So this is not really for you guys, but in various iterations of this presentation, I do like to end with this, just because I love to throw this out, that for you know, my clients and organizations that I work with and volunteer for is to dare to be different, be impractical, maintain your integrity, but be imaginative, and look at new ways of doing things. And I'm hoping that you will all support that. So I'm happy to take any questions now, and I'll just get out of this and see if there are any questions in the chat. Screen sharing has stopped. Okay, great. Yes, Jim.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. When we do our wealth and estate plans for our clients, and part of that is reviewing their will, we quite often find, especially if they do not have children or they feel their children aren't going to need their money, we quite often find that they have specifically named a dollar amount in their final wishes as part of their philanthropy. But am I right in that it's probably best to caution them against a dollar amount, because quite often we find they don't spend that what they thought they were going to need in retirement, so they have quite a bit more, and it sometimes doesn't address the tax bill. So I guess this question is maybe more for the lawyer. Is it that simple to put in a will after everything's paid off and after everything's, I want to leave everything and not have to cover it with a dollar amount, and by way of my portfolio of what's left, or a dollar, or simply what's left? Do they do that in wills? Because usually I just see the dollar amount.
I have not. I'm gonna, if there's anybody, a lawyer on the call, who would like to answer that. I've never seen anything other than a dollar amount, or a percentage of the value of the estate. I don't know how that would be handled in probate, or if it would be challengeable if it wasn't specific.
Yeah, I just find out that it turns out to be a lot more than they thought. And when they're reviewing their will, then they always have to amend it because they think they can now give more than what they thought in the past. So this is just one way around it.
Mm-hmm. Well, if an organization is doing a good job in terms of stewarding its donors, you know, you do make efforts to know who has left you a gift in their will, and to, you know, continue to build that relationship with them. So, and it's even better if you have the relevant passage on file, so you know what to suspect. But I'm happy to, as far as the legal aspect of it, I can't answer that.
I can take a crack at answering that, Andrea and
Okay.
Jim. Short answer is yes, absolutely. There's no reason why a testator in a will can't simply say, after all my debts are paid off, after my taxes are paid, and perhaps after I've given certain other specific bequests, whether that's dollar amounts or percentages, to say everything else that's left over, which is called the residue in a will, is to be given to one or more charities. So absolutely no reason that you cannot do that. And I guess it really boils down to the wishes and intentions of the person writing the will. You know, is their primary focus or objective to give money to, say, family, that is, give their residue to family after they give maybe some specific dollar amounts or percentages to a charity, or is it the other way around? So, but the short answer is yes. And you're right, it is risky to do those kind of things in a will in terms of specific dollar amounts.
Okay. Other questions?
Andrea, while I'm unmuted, nice to see you, by the way.
Nice to see you too. And Sandy.
It's been a while. Just so for us professional advisors, from my perspective as a lawyer, I see there's several other lawyers on the call and several financial advisors. What's the best approach in your experience? What's your advice to us as to how best to present the idea to a client of giving something in a will, or perhaps even before they die, and to give to make some charitable giving before, while they're still alive? What's, and I guess I come from that partly because I'm one of those people that you referred to earlier that thinks it's not easy for me to ask for money. Now, I realize in this context, I'm not asking for the money, but I'm asking them or suggesting that they think about giving some money to somebody else. How best to approach that with clients?
You know what, I think it's about focusing on what they're through questions like, do you have any relationships with organizations that you want to continue on, as a legacy, or who have you really, like, sort of exploring what they've done in their life that they might want to continue to carry on. A lot of people just don't even think about it when it comes to their will, but I mean, I hear stories all the time where people are asked that question and they say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, I've been the supporter of this organization for years. I'd like to leave something for them. So really focusing in on from their perspective, and not finding, so affirming what's important to them, and then, letting them get there, as opposed to saying, have you thought about any charitable gifts for tax purposes? Here I have a list in case you want to, look at it. Well, that's not very personal, and it doesn't really speak to why they've been supporting organizations all this time. Does that answer your question, sort of? Yeah, good. So this question from...
Yes.
Okay, so, and I wanted to say something too about, multi-generational groups. We've seen a real growth in, you're probably all familiar with the concept of giving circles. Those tend to be, they can be multi-generational, they may not be, but the growth of things like 100 Women Who Cares in communities across North America, 100 Men Who, sorry, I've just forgotten the male title. But those tend to be multi-generational groups. Certainly with family giving, there's as I said, there's a lot more focus on this. And I'm aware certainly of any number of family foundations in the Calgary area where the opportunity for the foundation has now been fully transferred to the next generation. But that is done generally over time. And so one of the primary reasons that people start a family foundation is to engage their children in the legacy that they have of supporting and being a community leader in this regard. And over time, it becomes very clear that what's important to their next generations are not necessarily what they have traditionally been investing in or has been important to them. And the world changes. I mean, so, we see much more focus on the environment, for example. And now, certainly in the wake of Black Lives Matter and Truth and Reconciliation, the investment of significant funds from all generations, but very much so the younger generation in those areas. So it's not usually something that happens, the transfer to the next generation. It's not usually something that happens immediately. It's something that happens over quite a number of years, with a gradual, bringing children into the foundation, giving them a role, having them involved in reviewing possible grantees, talking about it, visiting with organizations, and everything to a time when then they can actually take over the foundation themselves, which was usually the original intent of the couple that would have set up the family foundation. And I think community foundations have a really significant role that they can play in nurturing and cultivating those discussions and providing a safe place for them to have those discussions.
What about, Andrea, do you have a comment on, so I have a specific fact or client situation that happened recently where somebody came in with an existing will and a fairly significant gift in that will to a charitable foundation. The client's accountant got involved in the discussion, one of our local accountants here in the Valley, and offered the advice that this person should think about reducing the amount of the gift in the will and increasing her gifting while she's still alive. And maybe this is a question for any of the tax specialists in the audience here, but is it more advantageous for an individual from a tax point of view to gift money before, while they're still alive than it is when they, in their will, when they die?
Yeah, do we have an accountant who's willing to step up on that one?
I'm not a tax accountant. Oh, someone else talking?
Sure. It's Bryce. Hi, everyone. And maybe Don, I could just speak to it from a not necessarily from a tax standpoint, but if somebody is looking to, in a traditional sense, leave something in their will to a charity, and instead want to, say, for example, assign a life insurance policy or something along those lines to a charity before they die, I think the real advantage, not necessarily from a tax standpoint, but it's more for the for the charity standpoint to get access to the capital before the person passes, I think is probably the real advantage to that. It's just present access to capital more than anything. So.
I was just going to add too that it would be very dependent on that individual circumstance and other income that may be in play. So very personal, I guess, assessment.
And there's a comment in the chat box from Jonathan about, my thought would be to consider the donation credit versus maximum taxable income, since you cannot donate in excess of 75% of income. Okay. We've come up to our time, I think.
Thank you so much, Andrea. I know that I learned a lot listening to you and thinking about, in particular, the kinds of things that we should contemplate during the process of planned giving. What are the factors to take into account when making those kinds of decisions, and some good follow-up questions as well. So I hope that will help a number of you in some areas of your work, and perhaps inspire you for questions you may want to have or conversations you may want to have with your clients ongoing. I know that in speaking to Lori, she's absolutely delighted to offer to have conversations with some of your clients or with you, follow up to this session, if that's something that you would like to do, condensing some of what we talked about today, and also looking at, from our perspective, a number of different funds that we have that would allow donors to direct funds either to a particular agency or to an issue area, or into a general pot where we ask the community on a regular basis what their priorities are. So lots of areas there to think about. Lori, is there anything that you'd like to add before we go?
Just that I think we would be interested to hear from you if you've got any thoughts about how we might be of service, anything that we can do to support you in supporting your clients. We've got access to lots of resources and lots of expertise also in the community, and are happy to bring those into any kind of conversation, or in providing further information to you. So just maybe echoing that invitation to don't hesitate to be in touch. And on the screen there is my direct line and my email address, and we'd love to hear from you. And just thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you, Lori. We'd also be very happy to hear if there's any follow-up materials that you'd like us to send out at all. There's quite a bit on our website, Banff-Canmore Community CF, banffcanmorecf.org. As Lori is saying, if there's any particular areas you'd like more exploration of or more information of, we'd be very happy to provide it. Are there any last questions before we go? Seeing none. Andrea, thanks so much. You really brought a career's worth of wisdom and knowledge to the table today, and it's so hard to go through that in an hour or less. But
I think that this group and your organization has a really important role to play in making those linkages between donors and various causes. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. So I'm seeing lots of thank yous as people start to check out. Thank you again, everyone, for attending and for making some time. And I hope you have a chance to grab some lunch before